The following is a paid political announcement.
Lifelong Democrat Diana Florence served for 25 years as a Manhattan prosecutor under DA Robert Morgenthau. She put criminals away, stood up for victims, and protected our streets. Now, Diana is challenging failed Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg as an independent because it's time for a DA who fights for our families, not criminals. That's why Diana has won the support of organized labor like the steam fitters, plumbers, and ironworkers, everyday New Yorkers who want a DA they can trust. Manhattan needs a DA who will do the job, prosecute crime. That's Diana Florence. Under Alvin Bragg, crime is up and prosecutions are down. Bragg doesn't prosecute crime. He plays partisan politics. Bragg failed to protect women and failed to protect workers. As a prosecutor, Diana Florence won groundbreaking convictions, fighting against corruption, domestic violence, wage theft, and daily working conditions. She's always been a partner of unions, community groups, and to cops like us. For Manhattan District Attorney, vote for Diana Florence. Diana4DA.com. Paid for by Diana for Manhattan DA.
Introducing Meta Ray-Ban Display, the world's most advanced AI glasses. With a full-color display built into the lens of the glasses, it's there when you need it and gone when you don't. Send and receive messages, translate or caption live conversations, collaborate with Meta AI, and more. Be one of the first to try Meta Ray-Ban Display. Visit meta.com/Meta Ray-Ban Display to book a demo and find your pair.
The More Money Show with Steve Moore.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show. I wanted to bring on my good friend Scott Rasmussen of RMG Research because he is one of the top pollsters in the country, as you know, and also does the most interesting polls just about of anyone. So, Scott, thanks for joining again.
Steve, it's always great to chat with you.
So a couple things I wanted to talk to you about, Scott. One is I want to go back to something that you and I worked on, 2 or 3 years ago, a kind of elite opinion versus, average American opinions. I think that study had an enormous impact on the voting of people. Explains a lot about why Trump won, in my opinion, in 2024, because I think the elites of America were out of touch. First of all, can you just very quickly review some of those amazing findings? And then I want to ask you about whether there's still this divide between normal Americans and elite Americans.
Well, I can answer the second question first, which is yes, the divide exists. We did this research when I first came to you with the thesis. We noticed that people who had a postgraduate degree were out of touch with just about everybody else. And so were people who lived in large urban centers, places like Manhattan, and, of course, people who had a higher income. So we put the three of those categories together, and it turns out about 1% of voters have all three of those attributes. We call them the elite 1%. Yeah. And the survey we did with you, the first finding that shocked me was that about half of these elites think the rest of us have too much individual freedom.
Yeah, unbelievable.
And by the way, among the elites who talk politics all the time, about 7 out of 10 said we have too much individual freedom.
And by the way, they have, sorry to interrupt you, Scott, but you know what? They have almost disdain for real, everyday Americans.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, most of them say that you should not be allowed to vote unless you have a college degree, which means they want to
be a disaster.
Half the country. And by the way, that sounds to me a lot like the old Jim Crow laws.
Exactly.
You get rid of the people.
Maybe the next thing I'm going to say is you have to be white to be able to vote.
But they trust the government.
Yes.
They don't. Most of them believe we should ban ownership of private ownership of guns.
Right.
They want to ban
air conditioning,
and gas-powered cars. But here's the kicker: among the politically active elites, 82% of them think that most Americans agree with them on important issues.
And they don't.
So they don't, but they're delusional about it, and that's a big part of the reason they're so out of touch.
So I was so proud to partner with you on that at Unleash Prosperity. I think it had a huge impact, and I think Americans get the joke now that these people do hold them in disdain. And this confirm my suspicions in dealing with elites, because I deal with elites all the time, which is that they believe they're morally, intellectually, and culturally superior to the rest of us.
That's exactly right. And, if you go back when you and I were in school, we learned about a thing called groupthink and how it led to the Bay of Pigs debacle and other things. A big event for my life was worrying about the Vietnam War. And David Halberstam wrote that book on how the best and the brightest.
The best and the brightest, yep.
And it's because they think they're smarter than everybody else. And when something contradicts their view, they just dismiss it.
One thing, that's an interesting point you just made. I did read that book by Halberstam. I was always against the Vietnam War because I grew up with brothers who did not want to go to Vietnam, and it was fun. And it was a perfect example, by the way, of it took the elites 7 or 8 years before they caught up with Americans who said, we don't want to be in Vietnam.
Right.
So I think you're really onto something. So let me go back to that first point I made. You started to answer it, which is we did that study 3 years ago.
A couple years ago, yeah.
Is there been did the elites get it now that they're out of touch, or are they still out of touch?
Well, they're still out of touch. With the Napolitan Institute, we've done some further studies, and we see the exact same sorts of attitudes, and they just don't. They're in different worlds. And look, we saw this in the 2024 campaign. How many times did you hear economists say the American people are wrong? The economy is doing great. Look at our numbers.
Right.
No, it wasn't great. People knew what was going on, but because they were so isolated, they just didn't see it. And let's be honest, for people in an elite bubble, inflation didn't matter, the price of gas didn't matter, none of those things really affected their life, but it sure did a lot of everyday Americans. So the gap is there, it's growing bigger. And by the way, Steve, I have a book that will be coming out dealing with this topic next March.
So we'll
What's
delve
the title?
Into
it a lot more. I can't tell you about it until the publisher finalizes it. But you can be sure it's about the theme of this elitist revolt.
Well, fantastic. We'll definitely want to get you back on when that book comes out. By the way, I just got a text from a couple people talking about Vietnam, and I want to make clear I have nothing but respect for people who wore the uniform and fought for our country. I just think the war was unfortunate. We shouldn't have been there. So I think you
Steve, I'm a couple of years older than you, and I had to get my draft card. It was at the tail end, and it didn't matter. Because we weren't going to be drafted. But yes, I share that. I have a special anger towards our elites of that era for getting us in and keeping us in so long. Part of my anger is the way they treated people who came back, and they simply ignored these heroes. So I'm with you on that. I think the war was wrong, but the treatment, those who went and served deserve our thanks and respect.
It's so interesting we're having this conversation because I think that also affected the Republicans and what happened in Iran and Iraq and Afghanistan, where the public was way ahead of the elites who said, we have to go in. And, now I think there's a general consensus that it was a huge mistake, $2 trillion down the drain. It didn't accomplish a lot. Americans don't want America to be the world's policeman, do they?
No, they would like us to be engaged in the world's world discussion. They don't want us to curl up and ignore everybody else.
Right.
But one of the very first poll I ever did back in the late '80s was on two topics. One of them was Social Security, and the other was NATO. And as far back as the late '80s, Americans were angry that NATO countries weren't paying their fair share. Obviously, Donald Trump brought it up as an issue decades later. But once again, the voters were ahead. They saw this was a problem. They didn't want us to get out of NATO. They didn't want us to get out of the treaty. but they thought everybody else should chip in as well.
Yeah, and Trump picked that up instantly. So one of the things we were talking about earlier on the show was an idea I have, Scott, and I want to run it by you because I'd love you to maybe do some polling on this because you're one of the top pollsters in the country. So I'm very much in favor. We talked earlier in the show of something called Operation Warp Speed for cancer, for heart disease, for multiple sclerosis, so we can bring, promising new drugs to the markets sooner and run, do a end run around the FDA, which oftentimes holds up these drugs. And we'd tell people, look, this is, this may not work, but we're, if you have, let's say, MS, this may help you. And I wonder if you could ask Americans what they think about that idea of, like, if you want to use it, a kind of right to try idea.
Yeah, so we've done some polling over the years on the right to try, and people generally support that. One of the things in almost all healthcare polling is that people are kind of uncomfortable about anything without any controls. And so what we have found is very effective is to leave the decision up to individual state insurance commissioners. Because
I'm sorry, say that again. Leave it up to who?
To a state insurance commissioner, to a state official, because the state commission, the health commissioner in Idaho might deal with things differently than one in California or New York.
And maybe red states might be more likely to approve these things than blue states. So we've only got a couple minutes left. I'm talking to the great pollster, Scott Rasmussen. The last thing I wanted to ask you about, Scott, is this debacle of the government shutdown, which is, I think most Americans think is just crazy, regardless of which side you're on. And I think Trump is in the right here. But what are you finding?
Well, like everybody else, we find that Republicans get a little more blame than Democrats. In our latest numbers, it's 40% say it's the Republican fault, 31 say the Democrats' fault. But the truth of the matter is it's not that big a deal.
Right.
Only 24% of voters are following the story closely. And by the way, 18% do not know that there's a shutdown.
That's amazing.
This is not going to be an issue in 2026. Assuming that the shutdown ends in the next couple of weeks or month. It's just one of those issues that's a huge deal in Washington and in the rest of America. It's another year, another shutdown.
So we got 2 minutes left, Scott. You always have so many fascinating poll results. Is there anything that anything that you've been working on lately that you found in your polling that you think our listeners would be interested in?
Well, there's an awful lot of topics out there, but the one thing that I've been trying to draw attention to a little bit is that next year we're going to have a big birthday party. Our country turns 250, and we're doing some special research on that. But I think it's important to recognize that our political leaders may have their own view of these things, and we may be cynical about some of our neighbors sometimes. But the American people continue to broadly embrace the founding ideals of freedom, equality, self-governance. That has never wavered. And I think it's important to remember that because it just never slips into our political debate. Well, I actually think that's going to be an issue in 2026 because there are some on the far left of the great political divide who think America is a bad place. So
that was the last thing I wanted to ask you about is, that I've been telling Trump and my friends in the Trump administration this whole theme of a kind of a new patriotism. Yep. And I wonder how you think that are Americans patriotic?
Oh, absolutely. Steve, we don't have time to go into all of it right now, but we've just completed a series of open-end discussions with 5 Americans from every congressional district, asking them what freedom means in the 21st century. What does equality mean? What are these ideas? What is the American dream?
Right.
And nobody talks like Thomas Jefferson anymore, but the ideals are still there.
Oh, that warms my heart. That warms my heart. Great message to end on. Hey, Scott, thanks so much. Let us know when the book is coming out so we can have you back on. That's Scott Rasmussen, one of the country's top pollsters. We'll be right back, folks. This is The More Money Show.
Thanks for listening to More Money with Steve Moore. You can hear More Money with Steve Moore Saturday afternoons at 1. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?
The following is a paid political announcement.
Lifelong Democrat Diana Florence served for 25 years as a Manhattan prosecutor under DA Robert Morgenthau. She put criminals away, stood up for victims, and protected our streets. Now, Diana is challenging failed Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg as an independent because it's time for a DA who fights for our families, not criminals. That's why Diana has won the support of organized labor, like the steamfitters, plumbers, and ironworkers, everyday New Yorkers who want a DA they can trust. Manhattan needs a DA who will do the job, prosecute crime. That's Diana Florence. Under Alvin Bragg, crime is up and prosecutions are down. Bragg doesn't prosecute crime. He plays partisan politics. Bragg failed to protect women and failed to protect workers. As a prosecutor, Diana Florence won groundbreaking convictions, fighting against corruption, domestic violence, wage left, and deadly working conditions. She's always been a partner of unions, community groups, and to cops like us. For Manhattan District Attorney, vote for Diana Florence. Diana for DA.com. Paid for by Diana for Manhattan DA.